Morning, Rabbi. Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Rabbi.
Okay, I'm going to put everything up on the screen. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a lovely weekend. Just wanted to announce that this week's shir is sponsored by Joby Eisen in honor of his father's recent yortzeit. May the neshama of Yitzchak Meir ben Eliezer have an aliyah, and that'll be for the entire week. Okay, thank you, Joby. Okay, so we had started this section in the Bi'urim, in the expanded commentary, about the trying to define what it means to act in bad faith. And one thing that we had said is that when an oral contract is made between two parties, he had defined two types of oral contract where if a person goes back on that contract, on that agreement, then it's considered to be mechusar amana, it's considered to be acting in bad faith. The first instance, he said, is when two people say in front of witnesses, do we have a deal? Yes, we have a deal. Sold. The object is now yours. You owe me the money. Witnesses, you testify. You are our witnesses that this transaction is done. That's if either party backs out on that kind of verbal declaration, that's certainly mechusar amana. The second is not as concrete, is where two people say, we both agree in principle that we're going to be enacting a sale. Reuven and Shimon both agree, and they just verbally, or let's say over the phone or in person, they say, yes, we're going to go ahead with this. But they don't say, almost as if, they don't say it's a done deal. They say we're going to do this in the future. But even there's a mechusar amana if there's a meeting of the minds on the sale and on the price. Now we're on the fourth line in the Biurim on page Gimel, and he states as follows. He says, Ulam yesh ofan shlishi hamatzui lema'aseh. He says, however, there's a third instance which is not so clear that it's going to be mechusar amana. V'hainu sha'adam nichnas lechanut, excuse me, that he says the instance will be a person walks into a store and he liknot eze chayfetz, to purchase a piece of merchandise. Ula'achar masa umatan shebeinehem hishtavu al mechir misuyam. And then after negotiation, they arrive at an agreed upon price. And then when it comes time to pay, the buyer looks in his pocket and realizes that he left his wallet at home, or he doesn't have enough in his money in his wallet, or he doesn't have his credit card. And he tells the seller, give me a few minutes. I'm going to get some cash from the ATM, or I'm going to go home and pick up my wallet. And then after this guy leaves the store, another person comes in and he wants to buy the exact same object. And like we said last time, this could be either the last of its kind, or it's a one-of-a-kind item. It's, let's say, a work of art or a handcrafted object. So he says like this, V'yesh la'ayin in b'chi ha'gavna mutter l'mocher limkor ha'chefetz la'adam zeh sheba ka'et. what we should really think about is it permitted? Is there any moral imperative or legal imperative for the seller to hold the item for the guy who he had agreed to sell it to originally and then left the store to get money? Or is he allowed to sell it to the buyer who's right there? Kaven shikvar sikemi makona harisha. He already came upon an agreed upon price with the first buyer. Ulanias daiti nira litzaded velomar. He said, it would seem to me, in my humble opinion, the imharishon hanichnasu adam zar legamre sheino makiro to klal. He says, it would seem to me that if the first person, total stranger off the street, he doesn't know the fellow, and they have no relationship whatsoever, efsher de ba'ofen zeh ein lo mocher his chayvus elav ve'ein bo chisaron amana. It's very likely, he says, that in that situation there's no lack of good faith for him to sell it to the second guy who came in now and is ready to pay cash. Shaharei vadai, Shaharei vadai kol mocher me'unyan v'rotze limkor kama sheyoter maher. He says, we know that every retailer is interested in just getting rid of his merchandise as quickly as possible. Ve'ein lo shum inyan lahamtin al koneh harishon. And there's no imperative, therefore, for him to wait for the first buyer. And he says, and how is the seller supposed to know whether the first buyer is sincere in his desire to carry through on the purchase? Maybe the guy left and then changed his mind while he was outside the store and is never going to come back. Al kain, so he says, unless the seller told him explicitly, I'm going to watch this item for you until you get back, then he has no obligation. In other words, if it's one thing if the seller says, okay, I'm putting a tag here that says sold, and I promise you I won't sell it until you come back, but I'll only watch it for the next 24 hours or something like that. Then clearly the seller is obligated. But if the seller didn't make such an offer, then he has no obligation, moral or otherwise, to wait for the first guy to come back. And there's no lack of faith. And I'll go even further, he says. The aflamishu hu yirei shamayim, v'hu mekayim afilu machshavos libo ch'dehevi kan harav ha'mechaber. He says, and I'll go even further, and I'll say that even from a piety standpoint, where, as we'll see, as we've seen already, that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is of the opinion that a pious person should go above the letter of the law and try to fulfill even his heart's intent, even when he hasn't verbalized anything. Mikol makom bazeh shiny. He says, but this is different. The davka hecha shegomer belibo limkor liknos besikum misuyam az yirei shamayim yesh lo lekayim hashenemer v'dover emes bilvavo. He says, what that halacha of piety is addressing is that if a person made a decision in his mind that he was going to sell an item for a specific price, that's where we say, even when someone offers him more, he should stick to his original intent. He says, but this is different. And the reason why it's different is because it's not within the purview of the seller alone based on his own decision to sell. He says, because many times a person may say, okay, I'm willing to sell this item and I'm going to sell it to this guy, Shimon, who's standing in front of me. He says, but it's quite common that even though Shimon appears to be sincere and appears to want to purchase it, it is quite common for him then to leave and then never come back. Either because he finds a similar item in another store, or any other reason, where he goes back to the house and he tells his wife, I'm going to take my wallet to buy this. And then his wife says, what are you talking about? We can't afford that. And then all of a sudden he realizes, and then he stops, or whatever reason. I hope I'm not projecting here. V'imkein ein kan shum gemirus vahaskama amitis rak al hamachir. He says, and therefore, the only thing that we would take a person who wishes to be exceedingly pious, we would take him to task when he's completely in control of the circumstances. If he already made a decision in his mind, and we would tell him, well, if that's your decision, you should follow through with your decision. But when it comes to a decision that he's going to sell specifically to this guy, he says we wouldn't say that a person has to follow through. So up until now, I've been talking about a complete stranger that comes in off the street. He says, and I'm also talking about a case where there are many stores where buyers have multiple options to purchase whatever they want, wherever they want. And it's very possible that the guy's not coming back because he may find something similar in another store. He says, but if, let's say, the buyer is well known to the seller, and the buyer is a friend or an acquaintance of the seller, or let's say the buyer requests of the seller, would you mind putting the item aside? Don't let it be on display anymore because I'm definitely going to buy it. And you watch over it. He says, in that it would make sense that there is acting in bad faith if afterwards the seller goes ahead and sells it to someone else. But even in that scenario, if sufficient time has lapsed and the buyer has not shown up, so he says, then it would seem that the seller does not have to wait for him. And how much time has to elapse? He says it's a subjective amount of time. But what would probably be best is if it's stipulated at the outset where the seller says to the buyer, listen, I'm happy to watch this for you. We will put it on hold for 24 hours. And if you're not back in 24 hours, we're going to have to put it back on display because then we'll have to assume that you're not showing up. Right? So, in thinking about this scenario, I realize that it can happen, and it used to happen quite often. In today's world of e-commerce, these kinds of things do not happen as often, but there is such a concept of being able to put something on order and then to cancel the order later. And there, the idea of bad faith really doesn't come in. I guess for a seller, it certainly doesn't come in because there it's clearly marked whether the item is on order or is not on order.
Right?
Yeah.
Rabbi, I have this sort of situation happen to me quite often, especially, let's say, here in the city of Toronto, where, let's say, a lady comes into a store. She spends a lot of time with the store owner, let's say, to buy a dress. They make a sort of arrangement. The lady says, "I'll come back." In the meantime, what she does is she goes around to another store. Let's say it carries similar dresses of ours and does the same thing. So some of these ladies will do it 3 or 4 different stores and try to get the best deal and pushing that, taking a lot of time of the store. So isn't there an obligation on the buyer this way? Because there's all sorts of issues here of wasting the time of the seller and not acting in good faith.
Absolutely. There's absolutely an obligation on the buyer to be honest. And, look, the whole theme of this first halacha is to be truthful to oneself and obviously to be truthful to somebody else. When the buyer says, I'm going to come back and make good on the purchase, then they don't follow through with their word, he's actually not referring to from the orientation of the buyer. He's actually referring to the orientation of the seller. And he's saying the seller we want to make sure that you understand the seller's not acting in bad faith if he feels that he can't trust the buyer because there are so many buyers who are unscrupulous, as you've described. How many times has it happened where even we, out of a sense of embarrassment, where we're in negotiation with a certain vendor, and we say, listen, I'm going to think about it and I'll get back to you. And then we don't get back to the guy, because I'll get back to you means it's almost that if I find it somewhere else, I'm going to buy it somewhere else cheaper. And if I can't find it anywhere else cheaper, I'll come back to you. So, it's there's a lot of things that we could do to improve our language when we're involved in trying to find the best price on a piece of merchandise. We shouldn't say, I'll get back to you or I'll come back to you. We should say, listen, I'm going to look around, and if I can't find it anywhere else at that price, I'll come back to you. We should be honest. I think that there's a certain embarrassment that we have to say that we're looking for it at a better price, because when you are negotiating with someone in person, you develop a rapport, and we feel a sense of, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but we feel a sense of, I feel obligated now to this person because I've taken their time. So I don't want to flat out say to them that I may never see you again when I walk out that door. I want to give them that sense of hope. But it's wrong. It's wrong to give a seller the expectation that you're going to follow through with the sale, and you never do. So you're 100% right. From the buyer's perspective, he's got to be honest as well. But here we were talking about, what does it mean to act in bad faith as a seller? Okay. In the next section of the Biurim, we're not going to see the entire paragraph. We're just going to see the first 5 or 6 lines, because we then saw that a person who does not follow through on an oral contract is called a mechusar almana. The Imrei Yaakov had gone so far as to say that you're allowed to call that person a rasha or an avrayan, a bad person who violates the Torah. And then there was a second language that the Shulchan Harav used, was called the Ein Ruach Chachamim Noicha Heimenu. The spirit of the sages does not get pleasure from this person. So, and that's an unusual language, because it basically implies it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is unhappy with you, it's that the Chachamim themselves are not happy with you. So what kind of language is that? So the Imrei Yaakov just wants to clarify. He says, Lashon ze isa b'gemara, v'nifsak b'Rambam perek zayin me'Hilchos mechira, u'b'Shulchan Aruch siman reish daled siv zayin. He says this is a language that is derived from the Gemara. It's in the Rambam and it's in the Shulchan Aruch. Uvepashtus mashma shedin zehu rak mitakonas chachamim bilvad ve'in bo iser Torah. And based on this language, it seems as if that this is only a rabbinic position, that a person should fulfill an oral contract, and it's not a biblical law. The davka in bishas hadibur yesh kvar b'daito l'shanos az asr min haTorah. He says because there is an aspect of biblical prohibition if you don't follow through on your word, but that's only when the words coming out of your mouth, you are conscious that they are actually false at the time when they come out of your mouth. So, for example, if you say, I'm going to sell it to you, and you know very well that you're not going to sell it to the guy, or you say, I'm going to buy it from you, and you know very well that you're not going to buy it from the guy, that would be biblically usher. That would be an isser deoraisa. Right? The Alfinan Mehin Tzedek Shelo Yedaber Echas Befeh ve'Echas Belev. That we learn from the verbiage in the Torah, Efas Tzedek Vehin Tzedek. The Torah says you have to have correct weights and measures, but it uses a bunch of different weights and measures. And one of the measures that the Torah uses is something called a hin. And the Gemara asks the question, if I already know that a very small weight has to be accurate, then certainly a large weight has to be accurate, because there's a larger margin of error. So why does the Torah have to use all of these different weights and measures? So it says the Torah uses the word hin, not to only to describe the size of a weight, but rather the word hin in Aramaic means yes, which means that your yes must be yes and your no must be no. That you have to be truthful in everything that you say, so that you should not speak in one way and be thinking something else in another way. Kidei Sham, as the Gemara says that explicitly in Bava Metzia. V'chein kasav harav lekamen sif beis, and we're going to see this halach explicitly in the next sif. B'tziyin l'divrei hamilchamos v'harash shekasvu kein dehu asur min haTorah, and that's the way the Rishonim understand that to be untruthful in your speech when you know what you're saying is not true, that's when there's an Isser Torah. Aval kan de b'shas askamas hamachira haya be'emes da'ato kain. He says, but here it's not an Isser de'orais, it's not a biblical prohibition, because when the two parties entered into the oral contract, they had every intention of following through at the time when they made the commitment. V'rak achar kach chozer bo, and it was only afterwards that they one or more parties backed out. Bazeh eino over al Isser Torah. And there's not an Isser de'oraisa, but there's still an Isser de'rabbanan, to go back on an oral contract when you were very sincere at the time when you made the commitment, and then you wish to withdraw. You wish to pull out of the deal. So anyway, so that's why he says ve'ein ruach hacham noicha heimenu, and not that ve'ein ruach Hashem nocha heimenu. It's because it's not an Isser de'oraisa, it's only an Isser de'rabbanan. Okay, let us continue in the language of the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Ki roi la'adam la'amod b'diburo, because every person should fulfill their word and follow through on their word. Kamo shekasuv, as the pasuk says in Tzfanya, she'eris Yisrael lo ya'asu avla v'lo yadabru chazav v'goymer, that the remnant of Israel will not do anything perverse and will not speak falsehood. Okay, so as we've clarified from the Biurim, this is not referring to a person who knowingly is saying something false, right, at the time when the words come out of his mouth, but rather he doesn't follow through on his commitments. That's what the pasuk in Tzfanya is referring to. And that's why the Rav Shulchan Aruch uses a pasuk from the Navi and doesn't use the pasuk in the book of Vayikra, which talks about Eifas Tzedek Vihin Tzedek, because that's talking about when he's speaking falsely knowingly at the time when the words come out of his mouth. But here he's not speaking falsely at the time, he just doesn't follow through afterwards. Okay, now that we've discussed that issue, let's go on to the next level of piety, and he says as follows: V'yirei Shamayim yesh lo l'kayim afilu machshavos libo, she'im chashav v'gomer b'libo limkor lo b'sikum zeh, v'halo lo yadav mimachashavto v'hosif lo al sikum zeh, lo yikach mimenu ki im sikum zeh shegomer b'libo. He says that therefore a God-fearing person who wishes to go above the letter of the law should always attempt to even fulfill the thoughts in his heart, which means that if I had originally intended to sell this item to Shimon for $100, Shimon was unaware and he offers me 120, I should tell Shimon, I had already decided I was going to sell this to you for 100, so that's what I'm going to take. That's quite unusual line of thinking in our very aggressive world of being enterprising and trying to make as much money as possible. And why is that? To fulfill the precept in Tehillim that a person should speak truth in his heart. Now, take a look at the Imrei Yaakov in Osvav. She'im chosha v'gomar, that if a person thought and decided in his heart that he was going to sell it for X, wrote Salomar Tahaisalo Hachlata, which means that he had a decision made in his mind. Avol Masha Matsui She'over b'mocho Eze Machshava Ba'alma Im lo hichlit v'gamar ein b'zeh afilu midas chasidis v'ayin lekamen sifdal. He says, but if you just have a fleeting thought, what should I sell it for? Should I sell it for 100? Maybe. Then in that situation, that's not a definitive decision. And therefore, you don't have to worry about that. And we'll see when we get into the laws of tzedakah, that's going to be a very relevant issue, because when it comes to Hilchos tzedakah, whatever you decide that you're going to give, you have to give. Like that's why when you make a pledge, even a mental pledge that you're going to give a certain amount to tzedakah, you're obligated to follow through. This is what we're dealing with over here is buying and selling, and therefore it's only a matter of piety to follow through on your thoughts. But there's no halachic obligation. When it comes to tzedakah, there's even a halachic obligation to follow through on your decision, even a mental pledge of how much you're going to give to tzedakah. And therefore, we have to clarify, we're not talking about a fleeting thought of maybe I'll give this amount. It's got to be a definitive decision in your mind. I'm committed to this tzedakah, and I'm going to give them X. Okay, we continue in the language of the Rav Shulchan Aruch. V'chein halokeach shegomar belibo liknos b'sikum kach v'kach eno lachzor bo. And similarly, if a buyer decided in his mind that he was going to buy it for a certain amount, and then the seller says to him, well, for you, I'll give it to you for 80, and the buyer had already decided he was going to pay 100, so the buyer should inform the seller, I had already decided I was going to pay 100 for this, so here's $100. V'chein kol kayotze bazeh b'shar dvarim shebein adam lechavero, yesh lo lekayim machshavos libo. So then the Rav Shulchan Aruch concludes by saying that this is true for any commitment you make mentally to do for another human being. That you should, if you had already committed mentally to do something for someone, you should follow through. The act of piety demands that you follow through with that. Provided that you still have the wherewithal to do that. Like you committed to yourself, you know what? I'm going to buy my wife flowers on the way home, right? Or you committed, I'm going to give my friend a ride, or I'm going to go visit him to do the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, or whatever you decided you were going to do. As long as you still have the wherewithal to do that, a pious individual says, you know what? I'm going to follow through on what I had committed. But when we're talking about doing something for yourself, there's no imperative to follow through on what you've already committed to do for yourself. I'm going to treat myself to an ice cream cone today. There's no imperative even on a level of piety to say, well, I committed to myself that I was going to stop off at Zach's on the way home. How can I not follow through on my word? It's an act of piety. I want to be a chassid. I want to be a pious individual. No, there's no such act of piety. Unless there's an aspect of mitzvah involved. Unless you had committed to yourself, I'm going to do a mitzvah. And let's say you said to yourself, I'm going to put on tefillin at mincha today, even though there's no obligation to put on tefillin at mincha. Or some other act of piety that you said you were going to do. I'm going to read 10 chapters of Tehillim this afternoon, or I'm going to learn some Mishnayos this afternoon. When there's a mitzvah involved, if you made either a verbal or mental commitment to yourself, then you are obligated to follow through, even though there are no ramifications to anybody else. Okay, we'll just see a little bit of the source of this mitzvah, of this halacha, which is from Rav Safra. We'll see the story of Rav Safra from Maseches Makos. We'll learn that story tomorrow, Mirza Hashem. I do have to get going. Are there any questions or comments before we call it a day? If not, have a wonderful day, everyone. I hope everyone.
Rabbi, be well, everybody.